Right, Craig, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation, especially around past life regression. I think there's definitely a lot that comes up and perhaps even a lack of understanding for many people, including myself. And then even understanding scientifically how that happens. And it can sometimes even interfere with people's own belief systems. So I'm sure we'll talk through a lot of that. But before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I know, this is a very deep topic, a lot of rabbit holes to go down, and certainly we could talk for 10 hours and still have maybe more questions than answers at that point. But I'm fascinated by the science behind this. I know this topic gets into somewhat of the new age and the woo-woo, if you will, but I'm fascinated by it on a more scientific level, spiritual level, more of trying to understand this reality that we're experiencing. And to me, the evidence of why I wrote the book, Past Lives Guidebook, is that I'm fascinated by the science behind it. And we can get into some of that here in a little bit. In terms of my own story, I started off moving into wanting to heal myself in the 1990s. As I was moving into my 20s, I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety. And the reason I became a hypnotherapist and wanted to move in a more spiritual direction as well is because of the healing I found through hypnotherapy. A lot of the kind of personal growth stuff I was reading and listening to in the 90s. It was before the internet, really, the internet coming out in the late 90s. But even like the forums you'd be reading about and personal development stuff, they'd always mention like the 5 things you can do to change your life. And one of them was always hypnotherapy. And it really helped me release a lot of the hurt and pain I was holding on to. But I also grew up in the Episcopal Church and went to a Baptist run school. And so religion was also very much a part of my upbringing. And I liked the spiritual side of it. It felt comfortable to me. It felt even maybe a bit familiar to me, especially the Episcopal Church and the robes and the candles and the Eucharist and the more ritualistic, aspects of it, the more ceremonial aspects of it. I really liked. And if people aren't familiar, the Episcopal Church is basically Catholicism light. And it was part of my life for about 20 years, growing up in those very formative years. And so I was very much a spiritual seeker, I think, as we moved into the late 1980s. Again, of course, no internet back then, but also a lot of the music I was listening to was starting to incorporate world music. And Peter Gabriel, Paul Simon and Graceland, David Byrne doing some Brazilian stuff with his solo music. And as that started seeping into my life, I moved up to Santa Cruz, California. More of my world opened up to other cultures. That's right near San Francisco, right near Silicon Valley, Cupertino, Mountain View. And there's festivals and you learn about other cultures and their music and the food and taking classes and Zen meditation, all sorts of stuff. And so my worldview just really started to expand again. And now it's not such a big deal. You have the internet, but back in the 1980s, you had what was right in front of you. And there wasn't a big way of expanding your world unless you saw maybe a documentary or a TV show or a class in college or something. And being surrounded by all these people from around the world really opened my worldview, of course, not just to the music and the food, but also their spiritual beliefs. And a lot of things that I was not aware of or felt comfortable with I started learning about, and reincarnation was part of that. And it fascinated me. One of the things growing up in the 70s was a show, some of your listeners probably know it, In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy was the host, this non-fiction show of the mysteries of the world. And I love that show because I love the strange and the unusual and paperback books about Bigfoot as I was growing up and things like that. And so there was a curiosity about different things, I guess would be the way to say it, that maybe mainstream culture wasn't that interested in. Now we have all these different shows about UFOs and Bigfoots and things, but back then it wasn't something that was in the mainstream consciousness. And so reincarnation started fitting into that curiosity and learning more about it. And what I found is I was dealing with the depression, anxiety I was also struggling with. is
Mhm.
that hypnotherapy was a great resource, but it also has this other added uh, aspect to it of going deeper into the spiritual side.
Mm.
Within and of itself, it's just a methodology of quieting the mind and the body. That's the basic foundation of therapeutic hypnosis. There's none of this magic, waving a magic wand, even a pocket watch in front of somebody and say, sleep. It's a way of quieting the mind and the body, even if you're struggling with anxiety, even if you're struggling with ADHD. You're allowed to do this because it's just moving into that daydreaming state of the alpha brainwave state. Basically, you're slowing down brainwave state. So if you've ever been in a meeting at work and your mind drifts off,
Mhm.
or a networking event or something, or you remember back in high school math class maybe, and your mind just drifts off because it's going to be the weekend, you're going to hang out with your friends, and you move yourself out of the present moment. Basically, that's hypnosis.
Mm.
It's that daydreamy state. And what's fascinating about it, by moving in this more relaxed state of mind and body, you can also access higher parts of yourself, I guess, what some people call the super conscious level of mind, not the subconscious, not the unconscious, but the super conscious
Mm.
level of mind, or your higher self, or all sorts of different ways of talking
Yes.
about it. But it's this idea that, and here's where maybe the first big rabbit hole comes, is that consciousness is non-local.
Mm.
And in terms of the research around that, as my world widened and I learned more about consciousness and reality, and just reading about it on my own time, just for fun and interest, as well as linking it to spirituality, because growing up in Santa Cruz, that's if people don't know, a very hippie-ish, Grateful
Mm.
Dead kind of town, a lot of LSD and things going around. And just because of my religious upbringing and just my own issues with mental health, in terms of my depression and anxiety things, that didn't feel comfortable to me.
Mm.
I was curious about it and not wanting to do LSD, let alone nowadays you can do ayahuasca and all sorts of things.
Right.
I wanted to find other ways because it made me nervous. I didn't feel comfortable doing it. So what are the other ways? Lo and behold, hypnotherapy can be a great way of moving into that state. So again, going down the rabbit hole of consciousness being non-local, meaning the consciousness is not imprisoned in the skull of ours. The house of our consciousness is not the brain. And one of the ways we found out about this is the research done by the US government in the 1970s and 80s, the
Mm.
remote viewing stuff. Now, here's where it gets conspiratorial, and you can see a lot of this stuff on the conspiracy theory sides of things. But this is real research that really happened. We know about it
Mhm.
because of the Freedom of Information Act that came out in the 1990s. And basically, back in the early 70s, late 60s, the US government found out that the Soviet Union was doing research in ESP and psychics. They were
Mm.
trying to weaponize create psychic warfare. So, in all intents and purposes, the war was moving to the mind. And could you move mind to the desk of the Oval Office to see what papers were on there? Could you move the mind and consciousness to the Pentagon,
Mm.
what the war plans were, where troops were being moved to, or things like this? So they're getting information. The CIA was getting information that the Soviet Union was doing this, so they want to do it. They don't want the Soviet Union, just like the space race. They don't want the Soviet Union to get ahead of them. And so they started looking around, trying to find scientists who would be interested in looking at this, and everybody kind of laughed at them and rolled their eyes that it's not possible. There's one scientist in Stanford,
Mm.
California, who liked to debunk psychics. That was just his free time
Mm.
hobby. He didn't like the pseudoscience stuff, and so psychics would come to him and try to prove themselves. And he was working with this one guy, and he had this big machine, and I write a bit about it in my book. There's a big, huge chapter about it, but there's a big machine that was encased in concrete underground to do some sort of scientific thing. And he wanted him to look underground into that machine and tell him what the machine does. This guy's mom is psychic. I can't look underground. But he said, I'll try. And he actually did, and told him what the machine was doing. And
Mm.
then he started manipulating the information coming from the machine. So this guy, the scientist, writes a paper about it. I had this guy come in. I don't know what he did. I guess I'd call it remote viewing. He remote viewed this machine underground, and I don't know what to think about it. And he distributed this paper just a couple of people because it was a bit embarrassing, and he didn't want a
Right.
lot of attention about it. Of course, the CIA finds out about it, and 2 weeks later, they're knocking on his door and saying, "We want more of this. We want you to find out more about it." And one of the big first experiments they did was they had a double-blind test experiment, and group A, group B came up with latitude and longitude of where to remote view a location and gave it to team A. So they have this double blind. Team A doesn't know what they're supposed to be looking at. So they remote view latitude and longitude. And what they find is this two of them, two remote viewers remote viewed the same location and found this underground bunker, huge underground bunker, people. And one of them was even getting the names of top secret files. This is in the United States that they're remote viewing this underground bunker, this military bunker. And they were getting names, name tags of the majors and the colonels that were working there. They wrote it up in this paper, and Team B was like, well, that's odd because that was my summer cabin. But the summer cabin was so small compared to the huge underground bunker that they discovered. And it was a National Security Administration underground bunker that was spying on Soviet satellites and where they were going. And the CIA and the NSA got into a big kerfuffle over this because they thought the CIA had Russian spies in them. Why you're looking at our underground bunker turned out to be true. And so they did at least 25 years or so of research around consciousness being non-local, the U.S. government. Now, they say they closed it down in the 90s when this Freedom of Information Act came out.
Mm-hmm.
If the programs worked, they didn't spend millions of dollars and decades of work and research if it didn't work.
Right.
So if it worked, they're still doing it. That's my guess.
Mm.
What was fascinating about the work they did, and again, there's lots of books out there about remote viewing written by the people who worked on these projects because they're getting so much flack and jokes and mocking about it that they said, this is a real thing, and here's what the program was all about. So that's why we have a lot of information about it now. The people, the remote viewers actually wrote books about it. And one of the things that came about during the research is that you can move consciousness forward and backward in time. So some of these remote viewers are seeing the future. One of them was a great story, mid-70s at some point, where one of the CIA knew that there was this big, huge hangar, warehouse, factory thing where the Soviet Union was doing something, but they didn't know what they were doing. They're building something, and they desperately wanted to know what they were building. And so they had this guy remote view inside the building, and he described the world's largest submarine. It's 20 torpedo shooters, whatever you call those. And at the time in the mid-70s, it was the world's largest submarine, and he described it in pretty great detail. The problem was it was so far away from the ocean, they said this doesn't make any sense. It's like this aircraft carrier-sized submarine, like building a aircraft carrier a mile away from the ocean. But you wouldn't do that. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, okay, we want you to remote view the future and see how they get it into the ocean. He says they're going to dig trenches because he saw he remote viewed 4, 5, 6 months into the future. He says they're digging trenches. And lo and behold, 5 months later, they started digging trenches. And they moved that submarine into the ocean. It was the world's largest submarine with 20 torpedo shooters or whatever. And evidence after evidence they were getting from the U.S. government that consciousness is non-local. That's just one aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone all the other evidence. At the same time, during the 70s, there was another, some research going on by Dr. Michael Newton. A lot of people know him from his books, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. But Michael Newton, he passed away, I believe, in 2011. But in 1969, as a psychotherapist, he was going to use some hypnotherapy to regress one of the people he was working with back to childhood to deal with some trauma, some hurt and pain this person was going through. And so he thought maybe a good step would be to do some regression work. So let's regress back to childhood, doing this hypnotherapy technique. He regresses him, but the guy didn't go to childhood. He kept going. He went past childhood. He went past being a newborn. He went past being in utero, and he went up to spirit state, back to being just a soul, 100% soul with no human body, back into spirit world, or what Michael Newton eventually started calling life between lives. And the guy did his healing work there. Michael Newton's fascinated about this. He's wondering if it was possible to get people there, because this is basically an accident.
Right.
Could you do this on purpose? Could you get people, can other people have this experience of the soul state? Is it real? Is this just a construct of the subconscious mind to find healing, or did he have a real experience? So he's experience. He wants to work with other people, see if he can find a way to get them there on purpose. And so he started working with people during the 70s. He created a protocol that helped people get to that state. And as he's working with people, they're having similar experiences to each other. They don't know each other. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. There's no WhatsApp. There's no texting. These people don't know each other. They're from different parts of the country, maybe different parts of the world. They're different age groups, different cultures, different backgrounds. Yet they're having similar experiences of spirit world. And so he starts researching that aspect. He spent 2 decades, all the 70s, all the 80s, researching and working with thousands of people. 365 days a year, he worked with thousands upon thousands of people over that 20 years, and then wrote his first book, Journey of Souls. And we worked another decade working with thousands of people, and released a second book, which is twice as big as his first book, called Destiny of Soul. And one aspect in this book, amongst many others, that people discovered they're having similar experiences of, is that we come here again and again for learning growth. And so our purpose here on earth as human beings is to grow and to learn and develop as souls. Not unlike maybe going to school here in the United States. Of course, we start in the first grade and we go all the way to maybe getting our master's degree. That's a lot of education. And let's say you're learning math. In the first grade, you're going to learn 2 + 2 = 4. And then in the next second grade, you're going to learn subtraction. And then you're going to learn your multiplication tables and long division and fractions. And then in high school, you're doing algebra and calculus and trigonometry. And then you're getting your master's degree at a university, writing those crazy equations on the chalkboard. It took multiple years, starting with grade 1 all the way to getting master's, 4 years of getting your master's degree in mathematics to become a master of mathematics. If you could look at each grade that we go through here in the United States as a life, maybe it takes multiple lives to get to an understanding of love or passion or intimacy or wealth. If you were to learn about wealth, if you learned about abundance, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that you'd want to learn from different perspectives? What is it to be richy rich? Live in a golden palace with golden toilets and all that stuff. What is it to be poor? What is it to live in New York or Tokyo or London or Paris? What is it to live in the streets of Calcutta and not have a home? What is it to be a white man living in Manhattan with a view of Central Park? What is it to be a Black woman living in the South during the 1940s? Would it be reasonable to assume that you need different perspectives to really come to a masterful understanding of wealth and abundance, what it can do and what it can do and how it can harm and how it can help?
Yes.
And so the idea is that we just go through these lives and maybe we're learning, they're threaded together, they're connected together in some way. Maybe we're learning different things. Maybe we're here for fun, just as a rest and relaxation, or to help others as a supporting person. And so again, it's one of those things where I think there's enough evidence at this point that, and that's again why I write the book, is that putting all this together is like that William James quote, one of the pioneers of modern psychotherapy. He said, to prove that all crows are not black, you only need one white crow. I think we have thousands of white crows at this point in terms of linking all this together, because even modern day science is scratching their heads around the math seems to indicate that this is a computer simulation. But it's possible that this is a holographic universe, or maybe it's the multiverse. And if consciousness is not local, we know and have proven that we can send consciousness to different locations as well as forward and backwards in time, at least in this life. Is it possible that consciousness is bigger than that? And we also have the ability to move it to create, or not create, but find memories of other past lives. And this isn't time travel. When you do past lives regression, where you do it for fun or for more therapeutic reasoning, maybe trying to find some way to heal hurt and pain or trauma or fear or phobia that is just seemingly has no contextual basis in this current life. Is it possible to remember this past life? And again, it's not time travel. Just as if I was to ask somebody about, hey, that meeting last month at work, tell me about that meeting. You're having a memory of that meeting, or lunch with your friends last week, or hey, tell me about high school. And did you play sports or music, or did theater, or do you smoke cigarettes behind the gym? Tell me about high school, or tell me about your favorite class, or tell me about high school prom. It's a memory, or your earliest memory. All we're doing is going a bit further. And you're not stuck there. You're not time traveling to this past life. You're just having a memory. And I think there's enough evidence at this point between even like Brian Weiss in his book, Many Lives, Many Masters, which really set off the popularity of past life regression in the modern age. And I think the reason behind the popularity of his book that came out in 1988 is because he wrote it from a more scientific perspective. It wasn't a woo-woo book. He's still alive. I actually just did a workshop with him. I finally crossed that off my bucket list last summer. Man's 82 years old, 83 years old. But in 88, he wrote this book. But he is a left brain analytical academic. That's his words. That's how he describes himself. He has a chemistry degree from Columbia. He has a medical degree from Yale. He turned to psychiatry, was head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai in Miami, and was working with a patient using psychotherapy to help her with her great anxiety and panic for a year. For a year, he's working with this woman and couldn't find a way to help and to move her out of that anxiety. And finally, he decides maybe we should try some hypnotherapy. Is it sounding familiar? And he wants to regress her back to childhood. Maybe there's something there that this trauma will come at it from that direction. And she goes back to a past life. Childhood, there being a newborn, she goes all the way to a past life. I believe it was Egypt, if I remember the book correctly. And she creates healing. Now, Dr. Brian Weiss thinks this is, again, a construct of the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind speaks in allegory and metaphor and symbolism and storytelling. Freud said that. Carl Jung said that. Milton Erickson said that. And the subconscious mind speaks to us in symbolism, in dreams, in metaphor, and we can speak back to the subconscious mind. That's a lot of the techniques in hypnotherapy is speaking in metaphor and stories and symbolism. He thinks that this is a construct of the subconscious mind to finally create healing. He doesn't believe it, but he's happy for the healing. So let's do it again. Let's do the symbolic and metaphoric healing again. Let's go back to his past life and create even more healing. Well, they do this a few more times, and she creates such deep emotional healing that he has to come to the conclusion that it has to be real. His expertise and his knowledge and understanding of psychotherapy and psychiatry is that you can only heal deeply in this way if you're resolving a real issue. She was also getting extraordinarily detailed information of that time period in Egypt. It was like PhD level information. This is the 1980s. This is 1980.
Yeah.
They had no internet, at least that we had access to. And this is the kind of information that you'd really need to be an archaeologist or an Egyptologist, some sort of PhD graduate program learning about this stuff. And she had the information. It wasn't like written in the books at the local bookstore. She was also getting personal information about Brian Weiss that nobody knew about. Like he had a child die really early, like 1 year old or something. No obituary. There's no way she could have found this information, even if she was stalking him. There was no way she could get this information. It was private. Only a handful of family members knew. It was a long time ago. And it wasn't where they were living. And so finally, as a analytical left brain academic, he has to come to the conclusion that this is real. It's that Sherlock Holmes quote: when you remove the impossible, whatever's left over, however improbable, is the answer. And he had to come to the conclusion that this has to be real. And that was 1980 and 1988. His book is released, Many Lives, Many Masters, and he just became the kind of head, if you will, of the modern past life regression movement, because he's on Oprah and all these different shows. Because I feel like he was able to explain this and come at it from a more reasonable intellectual level, instead of wearing a bunch of robes and hats and waving magic wands around and talking about past lives and psychic abilities. He came out from a more academic level of having researched it to try to prove that this was not real. And the only conclusion he could come up with is that it is, amongst all the other research he's done working with people over the last 40 years. And so again, I think, as William James says, to prove that all crows are not black, you only need one right crow. To prove that this is not just a one and done, that consciousness arrives as we're born and turns off with our last breath and it's wiped out. That's it for us. I don't think there's any evidence for that. And yet I think there's great evidence between the remote viewing, between Michael Newton and Brian Weiss, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, the work of Elaine McTaggart. I think there's great evidence to suggest there is something else going on here. Now, we may not have the entirety of the picture. Certainly, there are people way smarter than me arguing whether this is a holographic universe or multiverse or computer simulation or something else. But it goes to the fact they're not saying it's one and done. They're saying there's something else going on. And especially this computer simulation, why wouldn't we computer simulation over and over again? Isn't that the point of getting on, say, a pilot getting on a flight simulator? Like they have to fly to London next week and they've never been to Heathrow, and what happens if there's terrible turbulence over the Atlantic? What if they switch runways on me? If it's raining, if it's dark at nighttime, if they have to go to Gatwick instead of Heathrow at the last minute? They're going to do that simulation over and over again, preparing, finding scenarios they may need in the future. So when in the future it happens, a bad turbulence or the switching to a different airport, they know what to do. Well, if this is a computer simulation, this is our reality, and our souls are there in spirit world running these avatars of our human body, just like a video game. What are we here to learn? Maybe we're all here differently. What I'm here to learn is different than you, Furkan, or as opposed to all the listeners. Maybe we're all here somehow together because we're all listening to this and we're somehow connected in some sort of thread, or we've done this before in some sort of way. It's just, to me, at the end of the day, and the reason why I wrote the book, because my own skepticism and curiosity was, what's the evidence for this? The stories are great. Stories are fun. Yeah. It's a lot of Michael Newton and Dolores Cannon, things like that. The stories are fun to read. But is there any evidence to this? The children who have these extraordinary reincarnation memories of places they've never been to. After a while, again, how many white crows do you need to prove that all crows are not black?
Right.
Like how much evidence do you need to finally say this can't be a one and done? Yeah. So I don't know. That might have been a really long answer to a short question.
No, that's okay. I appreciate it all. Definitely can. And I appreciate your passion behind the subject too. I did have some questions just in terms of your personal life, and then we can get into some of the other things you've talked about. One of the things I found really interesting was how, when we chatted before, you talked about dealing with anxiety and depression and being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but a different type, right? Not the one that we typically hear about. Are you able to explain in terms of how it was different for you and how that fed into the depression side, perhaps even from the religious aspect that you touched on earlier, and shifting into spirituality? And has that helped you deal with the anxiety as well?
So we're in my teenage years, and this is the early 1980s. I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety. And it was just some aspect of my life that, for whatever reason, it started. There was some stuff happened in life. There's nothing too, I would say, extraordinary. Certainly, I dealt with my hurt and my pain, as a lot of people do. And that was the focus of, in the 90s, wanting to find some help around that. And again, just upbringing and just stories you hear about people doing drugs and things. It's just like I bought into a lot of that. And so that made me nervous. And so I wanted to find another way besides maybe the medication treatment and drug treatments, whether recreational or to help medically. And so personal growth became a big thing for me. Self-growth, reading the Tony Robbins books and all that. Well, that was my life for a lot of the 90s and early 2000s. And that was right when early 2000s where I really started, okay, this hypnotherapy, everybody seems to keep mentioning hypnotherapy. So I'll try that. It helped a lot. And it helped me learn how to manage. It didn't like completely get rid of everything, but it allowed the hurt and pain and things I went through, I was able to release and let go. For my 50th birthday, I just turned 58. For my big 50th birthday, I had an incident where I was working, and a lot of anger about something that happened, and I was angry for 8 hours. It was a dumb thing. Just one of those things where like, afterwards you just like, why is this rage within me? It can't be this thing. Because in and of itself, it was not that big a deal. And it was the next day at the gym. That was a Friday. And the next day, Saturday at the gym, I was at the gym, and I just felt great. I felt happy. And I was just like, what a wild switch that was, from just utter rage and anger to just feeling happy and light. It's almost like I'm bipolar. And then I just, oh no. And I know that's not exactly how bipolar works, but it just
Right.
like, just hey, after 50 years, this is like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Because you hear about bipolar and you hear about the crazy stories of people, they used to call it manic depressive,
Yes.
because you would be extraordinarily depressed, but then you'd have this manic stage, but the manic was almost this schizophrenic like euphoria of bliss. I know people who are but that form, whatever you want to call it, of bipolar, they'll get off their medication just to feel that high, that euphoria. But you're also making really dumb decisions.
Yeah.
You mortgage your house and go to Vegas to win it all, and then you owe the mafia millions of dollars and whatever. You just ruin your life. It makes for a great movie or a story, but it's what it can really wreck relationships in your. And but that wasn't what I was experiencing. I actually worked at a university, and I went to the mental health clinic there because it was January, and the school was out, and so there's nobody around, and so I thought, oh, now would be easy time to kind of get into the health clinic there. And I talked to a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I said, I'm struggling with this thing. And the other day, I just thought maybe it's a bipolar thing. And so she gave me the tests. We spent there a couple hours there doing the diagnostics and things, and finally came back as bipolar 1. Bipolar 2 is the one people are familiar with. That's the manic depressive. That's where you can go off the rails there and have a really euphoric, blissful, but non-cognitive experience and not really understand what you're doing at the time. That's that kind of more famous one because it creates great stories. Bipolar 1 is its more unknown cousin. And bipolar 1, yeah, you have the two poles, but instead of manic and depressive, you have depression and anxiety. So one pole is depression, one pole is anxiety. And it's not all the time. Certainly there are hits of happiness, there lightness. But what I found growing up is that I associated that happiness and lightness with spirituality. And so this is the things I still struggle with, whereas I wonder how my life would have been different if this or that or the other thing. And one of the reasons I came to this work is because I had somewhat of a spontaneous past life experience. Not in like a session, not working with anybody. I was talking with a friend on the phone, and she's having this kind of spiritual experience through dreams and things. And is a good friend of mine, and she lived on the other side of the country, and we talk on the phone on a regular basis. And she's having these dreams of which I was a part, and her husband was a part. And it was World II, and she's just vaguely putting it together. And on the phone call, I had this weird experience of just having this emotional release around that. It's very strange, very unsettling, because I could sense myself doing it while I was doing it and not understanding why I was doing it. Just having these sobbing and crying. It's like this World War II thing of people disappearing. And I couldn't find you. I couldn't find you. And finally, she just says, she didn't know what was happening. She's on the phone. And she says, do you need me to forgive you? And I said, yes, I do. And she said, okay, forgive you for this happening. And it just all went away. It's this upset, this emotional, and again, I wasn't upset before, wasn't upset after. It just was this kind of spontaneous release from whatever she was talking about. And that really set me down the road of wanting to find out more about past life regression and reincarnation and things like that. Not that, and that's the head scratcher of it. Was that my experience? Was I holding that for a member of my soul family to help release and let go and to help heal? Is that why I'm here? And so there's this interesting experience I had growing up where I was dealing with anxiety and depression, and I felt this happiness and lightness around more of the intense spiritual experiences. I even got into the evangelical movement, the charismatic Christian movement, because I thought that would get me those spiritual experiences.
Yes.
And so that led me down a road, maybe more focused on the spiritual side of things, because I wanted that hit. And I didn't really put all these things together until way later in life, as I started puzzle piecing my life together after the diagnosis of bipolar 1. I'm like, oh, okay. So when am I happy? I'm like, okay, I'm happy when I'm having spiritual experiences. So that makes me want to search for spiritual experiences, which makes me crave information and be curious about stuff. And so it's this weird lineup of, if I didn't have this issue, would I even be working with this stuff? Would I be researching it? Would I be looking into it? Because of my issues doesn't make it any less real. It just, that was the way to move me in that direction. I don't know. There's still a lot of questions. And like I said, we could
Yeah.
talk about this for 10 hours and have more
Yeah.
questions. And it was
Yeah.
this weird, strange experience of me to this road of
Mm.
even just writing the book. Does it all have to do with my intense need to have a spiritual experience because it makes me feel good? And that's where a lot of the skepticism comes in. That's why I want to figure out if this is real or not. I don't
Mm.
take it at face value because of my issues. And again, maybe that's a great thing. I wouldn't wish this upon anybody.
Right.
But, and again, in and of itself, it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people, I work with people who have had issues in their life that are pretty unbelievable. What they've gone through for years and years as a kid or something. It's not my story. But in terms of this dread and this anxiety and depression that's been going on, it led me to want to search more about spirituality. Maybe I wouldn't have done that because a lot of my friends from church and
Mm-hmm.
Baptist school couldn't
Right.
care less.
Yeah.
So maybe what needed me to push me in this direction, like that spark, was the intense desire to feel that euphoric spiritual feeling. How am I going to look at all these cultures here in Santa Cruz, because the Episcopal Church wasn't doing it, the Baptist Church wasn't doing it anymore. Occasionally here and there, is there some other way?
Mm.
What do the people from India know?
Right.
What do the people from Morocco know? What do the people from Australia know? What's going on? What if I do walking meditation? What if I do Zen meditation? What if I practice Indonesian martial arts? Pencak Silat, as the people in the front house did. Is it music? Can I get euphoric through music? The drumming movement, the drum circle thing was really happening in the 90s. Can I do this through? There's some person that I knew who was studying trance states using drumming. That was like his thing he's interested in. As more of he's learning about psychotherapy, but is also interested in trance states, but using not drugs or things like that, but drumming and and all this stuff was like at my feet. And it was just growing and learning, and again, widening my worldview. Because when you go into the New Age bookstore, I only like this one shelf. There's some angels and Atlantis and all this reincarnation. Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. But as I learned more, as I met more people, as I had my own experiences, as I studied, and my curiosity just led me to widening more and more of the shelves of the bookstore. Okay, yeah, I get it now. I understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that's just growing up, being American in San Diego, California. It's like we have no concept of reincarnation. Episcopalian, you have no concept of reincarnation, or I just didn't grow up with that. You grow up in a culture that's just, of course, we come back. Why? That's ridiculous that would just be a one and done. That doesn't make any sense. Of course, there's reincarnation. It's, this person's really adamant that this. Not even adamant, just thinks I'm the silly one and ridiculous one for not believing it. And what is that? And I find more information about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, long answer to a short question, maybe. It's this kind of long journey that I've been thinking a lot when writing the book, thinking a lot about like, how did I get here and have these issues that I struggle with for so long? Would I not be interested in this at all?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And coming back to the whole consciousness piece, because you talked about the whole non-local consciousness, and there's another different theories that you were sharing. Another one I've come across is the Donald Hoffman conscious agent. Basically, his theory around it's like we're wearing a VR headset basically in this life. So there's that piece. But there's another concept that Carl Jung talked about, was this collective unconscious that we can all basically tap into. So what do you think is going on? And tying it back to the past life regression, is it some state of consciousness that we're able to tap back into depending on what state we're in, and tying it into spirituality as well, where people talk about different levels of consciousness as you perhaps evolve as an individual, you're able to have a deeper understanding of things. So from your perspective, what do you think is going on? And then I want to come back to the healing aspect of it too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a really short answer to that. I have no idea what's happening. I wrote a 450-page book basically on the science and history of this stuff. And Like there's some ideas.
Yeah.
And again, these ideas are coming from people way smarter than me. So in terms of these really super duper smart people, these men and women with this extraordinary capability of understanding the math and understanding the physics behind it, if they can't come to a conclusion and sit in a room and say, no, holographic computer, no, computer simulation, no, VR, it's like, I don't know. Is it the whole collective unconscious? Because my experience of having that spontaneous past life regression, again, I wasn't like sitting on I was standing and eyes open on the phone and having
Right.
this experience. It wasn't like I was in a darkened room with beautiful music and sitting in a recliner or anything. Was that part of the collective unconscious? Was that my experience? Or was that part of the collective unconscious that needed resolution?
Mm.
Again, I think about this a lot. If I had the room, I'd probably have the 3x5 cards with the string attached, looking for
Yeah.
the serial color kind of thing. I just don't know. And that's what's so fascinating about it. I think
Mm.
that's what is so enjoyable about having conversations with you, and is that there's so many directions this can go.
Mm.
New theory that comes that, wow, that sounds fascinating. I don't know.
Mm.
Because I don't know if you ever saw that movie Interstellar
Yeah.
with Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. Okay. And not to give anything away, but that's an old movie. You should have seen it by now. But it's an extraordinary movie. It's one of
Yes.
my favorites. And I think I see it over and over again because every time I just hopefully learn something new or understand something more about it. It's
Yeah.
an extraordinary movie. But at the end, not to give anything away, but at the end, he's stuck in the Tesseract, the 5D world,
Mhm.
trying to communicate with the 3D world. And how does he do that? He can't just send a text, can't
Right.
call on the phone, he can't send a message or a telegram or Morse. He does do Morse code, doesn't he, with the
Yeah.
watch? And he's pushing the books. He's making the patterns of dust in the
Yeah.
light. And he has to find these other ways of communicating because there's just no way of getting the understanding, the knowledge, and the wisdom across
Yeah.
that threshold of. It's like how I explain it to people when they're doing a past life regression with me, like a one-on-one session or a group session, is that you're pulling in this 5D, this fire hose of
Mm.
5D digital information into a 3D analog brain. And so there may be some translation and some accommodations, the brain, this equipment that we have. And again, the brain does not hold the information, according to research.
Mhm.
The brain is the receiver, is the antenna,
Mhm.
with a lot of focus on the pineal gland as being the transducer.
Mm.
Back in the day, I don't know how it's done now with streaming and Netflix doing all this, but back in the day, you wanted to watch your TV show in the 1970s, 1980s, Thursday at 9 o'clock, you got to turn on your TV, turn it to channel 10, and a TV studio in Los Angeles would have this big cassette tape. They put it into equipment, and a transducer would take that image and sound off that magnetic tape and turn it into a frequency and shoot it into the airwaves.
Yeah.
At 9 o'clock on Thursday, I turn my TV on and I pull in through my rabbit ear antennas, or the antenna on my house starts vibrating microscopically. I pull in that one frequency.
Mhm.
Back in the day, we had the radios in our car and we had the knob to turn to the right station to access that information. Because there's 50 radio stations. You're in New York or Los Angeles or London or Tokyo or something. You
Yeah.
have 50 radio stations on top of the television station, on top of the microwaves and
Mhm.
nowadays cell towers and Wi-Fi. You're not getting 50 radio stations at
Right.
once with all that white noise and talk and music. You're tuning into one signal, one
Mhm.
frequency, pulling that in, and now you get to hear your music. Same with the television. You're pulling in one frequency, and I get to watch my TV show because I have a transducer in my TV, and that transducer turns that frequency back into image and sound, and I get to watch my show. Well, a lot of people are pointing to the pineal gland. Hold on a second. Are we on video?
Yep.
Okay, hold on a second. We're away here. Go to my bag. Since we're on video, for those of you not on video or just listening to this, basically, this is why I show people when I'm doing past life regression. So the pineal gland is right here,
Yep.
this green spot. It's about the size of a pea. We can get into the whole thing of the pine cone and the Egyptians and things, but we're not going to do that right now. Again, 10-hour conversation, more questions and answers. Pineal gland is about the size of a grain of rice. And what they discovered about 10 years ago is that it has all these crystals in it.
Mm.
Now, a person of middle age, they have about 40,000 of these microscopic crystals in this rice-sized piece of your brain. The pineal gland's main job is to produce melatonin.
Mm.
And melatonin is the hormone that puts you to sleep. As the sun goes down, more melatonin is produced. You fall asleep. As the sun rises, melatonin production stops. Cortisol levels go up. You
Yep.
wake up. That's the way it's supposed to happen. Now with artificial light and blue light screens and all this stuff, that gets messed up.
Yes.
But that's the way it's supposed to happen. The
Mhm.
crystals have nothing to do with melatonin production. There's no evolutionary need to have 40,000 crystals in this rice-sized piece of your brain. A newborn baby has about 10,000. Person in their 80s or so probably has 65,000. What it does, though, when pressure is applied, mechanical pressure creates a transducer effect.
Mm.
According to one research paper, which you know right here, which is the research paper. I don't know if you see that that's backwards or not, but this is new crystal in the pineal gland, characterization of potential role in electromechanotransduction. Basically, what it's saying is that pineal gland, as these crystals, because crystals conduct electricity, right? It creates an electromagnetic field when pressure is applied. That's why they're in our electronics, in our watches and things.
Yeah.
Quartz crystal, our quartz watches back in the day.
Yeah.
What it's saying is this research and other research is saying that these crystals in the pineal gland can create electromagnetic field.
Mm.
And that's what they're saying is the transducer, as the whole brain is the antenna pulling in this information, this 5D digital information into this 3D brain, translating it into image and sound. So we access this memory. And so a lot of theories, again, I don't know how much of this has been proven one way or another, but in terms of theories, and is that we're accessing this information from outside the brain. Consciousness is non-local.
Yes.
And one aspect, one more research paper that I show people when I'm working with them one-on-one or in groups, again, I don't know if that's backwards or not, but this is from the Frontiers in Psychology, Common Basis of Memory in Consciousness, Understanding the Brain as a Right Read Head Interacting with an Omnipresent Background Field. Basically, what this paper is suggesting is that all information is held within the 0-point field or the field, or
Right.
you're a Star Wars fan, the Force, or whatever. And this brain of ours, as we tune it to the right frequency, go back to the past life that is influencing all this anger or anxiety or hurt or pain, or go to past life as your most spiritual life, or go back to the past life where you have this fear of the ocean. Go back, whatever the channel is you want to tune to, whatever book of your life you want to look at. Instead of just getting a bunch of white noise, focus on something.
Yeah.
And you can access kind of the Encyclopedia Britannica of your lives and look at the book of your lives. And we're all allowed to do this. This isn't like the work I do with people. This isn't like a psychic reading where like a medium where I tell people what their past lives are. I don't want to do that. But this is your experience. We're having a conversation actually during this experience, so I can help guide and facilitate, and if there's healing, help with any healing or resolution of any hurt or pain that may happen. And we want it for the recording too, so you can listen to it later, read the transcript. So you're going to narrate your experience, even though you're in this trancey hypnosis, altered state of consciousness of the alpha brainwave state. But it's your experience, it's your memory.
Right.
Again, just like I was to have you close your eyes and tell me about high school. What was your favorite class, your favorite teacher? Did you go to prom? What did you wear? Did you get a limo? Your memories, and you can describe it to me. You can do the same with a past life. It's just a memory. We're just going to go a little bit deeper. Going to go to the deep end of the pool. You're asking about the meeting last month, where I'm asking about high school. That's the shallow end of the pool. We're going to go to the deep end of the pool. It's the same pool.
Right.
We're just going to go to the deep end of the pool and get a little bit more deeper information about maybe past lives you've lived and how they may be affecting life.
Yeah. And sticking to the altered states of consciousness, I think you're talking about LSD as well. And what I find fascinating about psychedelics is how there are those altered states of consciousness. And one of the things that I'd come across was, for example, DMT as well, the release of DMT when we die, right? So I find that pretty fascinating as well when you look at it from that standpoint.
A lot of people point to that as, well, see, it's all fake. We have this aspect of, as we die, you're accessing parts of the brain, and these are theories around all information is held within the brain.
Yes.
That you're creating this chemistry, these hormones, and you're tracing back your life, and you're accessing parts of the brain that hold that memory. And that's why people have my life flashed before my eyes. because you're creating what you were just talking about at the last moments of death. And we know this from people who have near-death experiences.
Yes.
They die, they get resuscitated on the operating table or in the paramedic in the ambulance or whatever. And they describe this, and they show to the chemistry. And then there's a lot. Then the people come back who are say yes, and that also shows that we can access this through the. So again, I think the more questions you start asking, it's extraordinarily fun to try to put the puzzle pieces together and put the 3x5 cards with the string. And I think at the end of the day, I know we're getting up against time here. I think at the end of the day, it's just you end up with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
It's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, for reasons maybe we're not supposed to know, we can only access so much information about how this all works.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll really understand the totality of reality and who we are and being in spirit form until we pass and move on to that. For instance, oh wow, it really is kind of working this as a computer simulation and a video game.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating, especially if you're curious about this stuff, to look into it. And there's enough information out there to show that some aspect of this, that what we've been talking about for the last hour or so, is real. Again, I don't think there's any evidence, even with what you're talking about, the light flashing before our eyes and the DMTs created at the end of life and things like that. Even that is okay, that's interesting, but I don't think that proves one way or another.
Right.
That this is just one and done. And that consciousness does not, again, if it's non-local, why would it all of a sudden power down, turn off? That doesn't make any sense. And again, I don't think there's any evidence that I have found that shows with any proof that consciousness starts at birth and we turn it off.
Right.
And it goes away like a burnt out light bulb that's never going to get turned on again at the end of life.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's any evidence of that. And I think there's extraordinary evidence, maybe circumstantial evidence at times. I think and when you put all that circumstantial evidence, after a while, I don't know. I don't see any other way. Again, you remove the impossible, whatever's left over, however improbable, has got to be the answer. But certainly it's fun to look into this and research and find out more about it. Even I don't start the book, but one aspect is, how does past life regression and reincarnation, how has other cultures throughout time looked at this? And I start with Neanderthal burial sites 50,000 years ago. Is there any indication in how they buried their community, their tribe, their family? Is there any indication that they had any sort of life after death beliefs? It seems like they did. That's 50,000 years ago with Neanderthal. And that's grown and widened over time, whether you have more of a Hindu look at reincarnation and past lives, or more of a Tibetan Buddhist look into it, or some other way. A lot of what we're learning about the spirituality of the kind of quote unquote lost tribes in South America, these these tribes that haven't been contacted, but occasionally a member will come out of the forest and talk to people for a day and then go back in the forest, never to be seen again or something. It's some crazy, and a bunch of stories like that in the book, what we can learn about their ideas around spirituality when they haven't been contacted by major religions to try to transform their beliefs. And it's, again, at the end of the day, I don't think we can point to one answer that this is the definitive answer. I think, again, people way smarter than me are still scratching their heads and wondering, this seems to indicate this, but that seems to indicate that.
Right.
And if reasonable people of extraordinary intelligence can have different theories and evidence to support that theories, I don't think I myself am going to come to any conclusions in this lifetime.
Yeah.
To talk about, I'll tell you that much.
I do have one more question, just to put it all together in terms of the healing aspect, right? So sometimes people have trauma from earlier life experiences. Sometimes people are just struggling and they can't seem to pinpoint any one experience in their life. And in the experience you shared too, where you had this past life regression, how does the healing happen through this process of going through past life regression? And then a secondary question is, how does hypnotherapy facilitate that, if you're able to?
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah. That's a great question, and a really important question, because at the end of the day, this is about the healing. And even if you come to this work through fun and curiosity, which is a great way to do it, it's very
Yes.
valuable, very worthy. Just have be curious about, past lives and who you were and this side of the spiritual work. But often people come to me because they're hurting and they're in pain and they've done the work. It's not like this is what they started off with first. Hypnotherapy and past life regression are usually at the bottom of the list.
Mm,
They've tried everything else. They've done the talk therapy for years. They've gone to the doctors. Maybe they've been on medication and it doesn't work. And maybe they read Brian Weiss or they read Dolores Cannon or they read my book, Past Lives Guidebook, or something else, and it feels comfortable. Or at least is here's one more thing I could try before I give up. It gives a little bit of hope because these other people that I read about in these books created healing. So maybe this is it. Because there doesn't seem to be anything in this life that is linked to this anxiety or this anger or this hurt or this pain. And so they do the past life regression. That could be what the focus is.
mm,
Go back to the past life that is influencing the anger. Go back to the past life that is a karmic cause of the anxiety you're experiencing in this current life. Something like that's turning the channel to the right station on the TV. And in terms of the healing, so therapeutic hypnosis is a great tool to use for this experience because of the ability to create healing. And it's not that hypnotherapy is creating healing. Certainly it's not that I'm fixing anyone. It's that it allows people to tune into their own healing abilities, to understand what needs to be let go, because oftentimes that's within the unconscious.
yep.
And that subconscious part of mind, holding on to it for protection, for healing. Maybe it's too dangerous to remember on a regular basis because of the extraordinary abuse that maybe went on or something
Yep.
else, the trauma. So it's behind the veil, but it needs to be released. And
Mm,
hypnotherapy is a great technique and a lot of tools within the umbrella of hypnotherapy to help with that. Now, when I did my training, I learned about the training I did to become a hypnotherapist. I actually went to a real school, the Hypnotherapy Academy of America. And this is 500 hours. This isn't some like 20-hour video course that you take. And now you call yourself a hypnotherapist or past life regressionist. This is 500 hours, the first 300 hours. And so it's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. This isn't like even a university class of
mm-hmm.
you go to your math class Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. This is 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday for 10 weeks.
Mm,
And the first in 2-week modules, so there's 5 modules. The first 3 modules, so the first 6 weeks is just clinical hypnotherapy. And so you're learning to handle and help resolve people's trauma or guilt or shame or anger.
mm-hmm.
And these techniques you use, and you sit in a classroom with 25, 30 other people maybe, and you learn about the scientific validity behind this, how this particular technique works. Maybe you see a demonstration at the front of class. Then you break up into small groups. You have these small little groups. And you break up and you work one-on-one with each other with a coach in the room, helping and supervising. And you work with these techniques. Now, that's the first 6 weeks. So it's worrying about hurt and pain and trauma, anger and anxiety. Then there's medical hypnosis, of which some of the classes were taught by physicians, a nurse, neurosurgeon, Dr. Dulce, Dr. Sapien, emergency pediatric physician, teaching some of the hypnotherapy classes during medical hypnosis, pain control, healing acceleration, immune system boosting. Then the last module, if you're interested in taking the last module, is the spiritual side of this work. Once you've learned how to help resolve the hurt and the pain and the trauma, and even the physical issues that may have an emotional component to it, or just somebody broke their leg skiing
Mm-hmm.
or something, help with that as well. According to research around Harvard and other places, very helpful, very useful, accelerating healing. Then you move into the more deeper spiritual side of this work, past life regression, natal regression, moving back to the womb, soul world, ancestral healing, these kinds of things. There's 100 hours just of
Mm-hmm.
that after you've learned how to deal with the hurt and the pain and the trauma and working with people. Then you go to the deeper side of this. And that's why I wanted this training. I thought it was very comprehensive and very intensive. It was extraordinary training. And so, in terms of your question, like it can be very useful, very healing, because just like you may have had an experience in this line. Let's say somebody went through some extraordinary trauma, some abuse as a kid, maybe once, maybe for years, while they're holding on to that. Maybe in this unconscious for protection, they're armoring themselves. Maybe that comes out in inappropriate, unhealthy ways, like anger that they have to deal with drinking or pills or something because of the hurt and pain. There's a lot going on there in terms of memory and the subconscious holding on for protection and safety. What if that wasn't established, that hurt and pain wasn't created during childhood, but another past life, and you're still holding on to it because it didn't get resolved? Look, if we don't do well in chemistry class in university, we got to take it over again. If we don't do well in the final in math in high school, we're taking that class over, or we got to go to summer school, or we got to get a tutor, or we got to go after class with the teacher and work on this stuff. If it doesn't go well, we may have to repeat the class, repeat the grade. Why wouldn't that be with this too? Just why would it all turn out hunky-dory, rainbows and unicorns at the end of every life? What if it doesn't go well? What if something happens? Like one of the stories, and this really helped me create the foundation of how I want to do this work, is this story that was told when I was getting my training during the past life regression part of this. And the teacher was just Tim Zimmerman, was just chatting before class. And he's the co-director of the Hypnotherapy Academy. And this school's been around for 40 years, still around. And anyway, we were chit-chatting before class started. And he was talking about how when he was doing his training to become a hypnotherapist and do past life regression, he's telling his friends, like, oh, I'm learning how this is. Must have been the late 80s, early 90s, something. He said, oh, I'm learning how to do this. I'm really excited, and I'm going to open up a practice. And most of his friends, oh, yeah, my ex-wife did past life regression. And she read the book, Brian Weiss book, was very excited, wanted to do this work, and was just interested out of curiosity and for fun. So she went to a past life regression person. And in her past life regression, the life she was remembering, it was more medieval, Middle Ages kind of time period. And she was part of the rebel alliance, if you will, that was fighting being the serfs and the feudal system and the authority figures and the kingdom and all that. And she apparently had a very loud mouth during the period. And so they wanted to make an example of her. So they arrested her and threw her in a horrible situation of the dungeon and tortured her to death and basically starved her to death, which is a very awful, horrible way to go months, and feed her a little bit and then torture her some more and starve her to death. And she realized while she's having this memory of this past life, that the jailer, the one who was doing all the torturing, was her husband in this life. And she came out of that past life regression and divorced her husband like a month later. And I'm going to guess there's probably other things going on in that relationship. But at the very least, that was a final straw of, oh, and you tortured me to past life. There was no resolution. There was no healing there because that person didn't know how to do it. Wanted to offer somebody an interesting experience, and literally destroyed lives. There's a divorce decree in Santa Fe County, New Mexico, that mentions past life regression. I have past life regression. My husband was an ass, and I'm divorcing him. And he doesn't take out the trash, and he doesn't do whatever the things are. And the thing is, they may be replaying this over and over again. There may be a pattern within this relationship between them that does not get resolved.
Yeah.
And keep repeating, okay, let's try it this way. Let's try it this way. Why can't we get this resolved? Let's try it this way. Let's try the computer simulation again and again. And if that person who is offering the past life regression work knew how to help her move through that trauma and help resolve whatever patterns were in that relationship between the two of them, they may have been done. But now maybe unless they've gone back together and done some counseling or whatever, or done the spiritual work, might have to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not, as far as I know, they're probably the same age as the teacher there, so they're probably still around. You have another 20 years in this life of resentment and anger and regret and blame, and they're going to have to do it again.
Yeah.
And so that's the importance of this. And again, long answer to maybe a short question, but in terms of the importance of this, even if you're not sure that there's healing necessary, want to make sure, that's what the importance of having a facilitator. You can do this on work on your own. You can go to YouTube videos. There's Brian Weiss videos you can do past life regressions with. It's got to be a more generalized kind of experience. And so if there's something specific, using somebody who can be there to help guide and facilitate and lifeguard the situation, and then understand what the connections are to have that healing happen. And in the Michael Newton work, I very much focus my work on the protocols Michael Newton set up. And we move up into that spirit world, and that's where the healing can happen. Understanding, wisdom can be gained about why this keeps happening and what needs to happen to resolve it. Now, again, that doesn't come from me, but maybe connecting with spirit guides or other spirit beings there, or your soul family, or connecting with that soul who keeps playing these roles in your life. They're creating these patterns, like actors in a theater group in town, the community theater group. And every year they do 6 different plays, and they decide, we're going to do this play, and these characters are going to start in act 1, and they're going to grow and learn, maybe through tragedy. So by act 3, they're different people. They have more wisdom and learning. And here's who's going to play what part. Here's the costumes we're going to play. And here's the time period it's going to be. We do this play. And then they take a break. And then in March, they do another play. And it's totally different characters and different costumes and different time period. And they're learning different things. It's the same actors. They're just playing different roles.
Right.
And so in terms of the pattern of these souls, okay, maybe they're up there in soul. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, what if this time we're husband and wife? And we'll try it that way and see how that works. But if you can find that resolution and that healing, pattern's broken. When you get that A+ on the final exam, and it's okay. Now we're going to learn about compassion next time. Graduated love. We're going to learn about wealth or something.
Right.
Or on something else.
Yeah.
I'll go on and on.
You touched on the movie Interstellar too, right? And from the scientific side, you can also make the case whether or not there's physics involved, the quantum world, and perhaps different dimensions too. That's a whole different area to go into. But I guess probably maybe we do another episode, because I know we've got the time constraints. But for listeners that want to learn more about your work and find you online, including your book, what are some ways they can do that?
Probably the best way is just the website, which is sacredmysteryhypnotherapy.com. And you can find the book, Past Lives Guidebook, on Amazon. I also have pastlivesguidebook.com, has more about the book. But if you want to, happy to talk with people, want to get on a Zoom call or a phone call, or just email back and forth about this work, see if it's something right for you or you have more questions about it. But best way to find me, sacredmysteryhypnotherapy.com.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all of that.
Because I know this, and basically just so, again, I can go on and on. But in terms of this work, there's 2 kind of ways of doing this. One is a shorter session, but then also a longer session. And that work Michael Newton was doing, that was like 3.5 hour long sessions. And so that's how I've structured my work now as I learn and grow and understand more. So there's a shorter session, a 90-minute session, it's a 3-hour session, but there's also recordings on the website if you just want to test it out. The way I do things, some recordings, you can download a free recording to connect with your spirit guide as a way to just maybe start out the process and see if it's for you. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put all of that in the show notes. But thank you, Craig. Appreciate your time. And like I said, maybe we'll have to have another conversation.
Yeah, anytime. Like I told you, I'll go on and on. It's always good to have a clock, have a timer. Yeah. We have an endpoint, but like I say, there's so much about this, so many rabbit holes to go down. And maybe next time more of a discussion around the physics of it or the science, maybe more in depth about the science would be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome, Prakash.